Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. Myself, Jonathan MS Pierce, Ukraine War News Update. First part for the 1st of December 2024. And of course, the habitual pinch and a punch for the first of the month, no returns. And it's just before midday. Okay, we're going to start with the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. The figures are pretty staggering again for personnel losses. In fact, I believe it's 7 of the 8 highest losses have come within the month of November, although this is for the 30th of November, of course. So 1,730 dead or wounded invaders makes it the 7th worst ever day for Russia. 7 of the 8 worst days in almost 3 years of war have come in November. Wow. Not surprisingly, a huge new record for the month with 45,720 lost soldiers. And that's with a 30-day month at an average of 1,524 per day. Wow. Okay, 1,730 personnel lost, 6 tanks, almost at the daily average here, 14 troop-carrying AFVs, a tad below the daily average, as are 14 artillery systems, 76 vehicles and fuel tanks, fairly high number there with 2 pieces of special equipment. That would suggest that there is quite a bit of activity, but maybe not as much as we have seen, but high personnel losses. And I wonder whether some of these personnel losses are coming with strikes. I wonder whether that 2030, as I said yesterday, might have included, say, visual evidence from the Storm Shadow strikes on those that command and control post that some claim saw 500 North Koreans get hit. I don't know. Who knows what's going on behind the scenes, but there are certainly really high numbers, but possibly not the highest number of mechanized attacks being used, or maybe they're just going top heavy on civilian vehicles. I don't know. Right, when we look at Andrew Perpetua's loss list for the previous days, we can see it's almost parity in terms of equipment lost and combat assets as well. So very close day for both of them. That's not what the Ukrainians will want to see. As far as what they've lost, we've got an abandoned Bradley, fell in a hole and then hit by a Vandal drone. A couple of YPR 765s, those are the interesting, they're seen as infantry fighting vehicles there, but they are the M113, glorified M113, it's marginally glorified, that the Dutch have slightly improved. Both of those destroyed. We've got in the APC list an M113 captured, and then a number of other pieces of kit. A BOV, not sure what that is. BOV APC. What is a BOV? There. Okay, Serbian. Wow, okay, so BOV, Combat Armoured Vehicle, that's what BOV stands for, is an all-wheel drive armoured vehicle manufactured in former Yugoslavia and today in Serbia. Second generation BOV is currently in development. So it looks like a fairly old piece of kit, although it might be the new variant, I'm not sure, but a couple of those on the list, interesting. And some MRAPs, we've got an Australian Bushmaster damaged by an FPV drone and a couple of Max Pros. And then we've just got a few trucks, 4-wheeler and civilian vehicles. Nothing too crazy in that list. For the Russians, we have a few bits of artillery, including a Bullseye 4. So that's the North Korean. I don't know exactly what I've seen the video of it getting destroyed, but I think it was a nighttime video from above, and it's quite difficult to actually see what it's like. But this is listed by Andrew as a piece of artillery. We'll see if we can find. No, it's not really rendering that page very well. Let's have a look at another page for it. No, that's another army recognition page. Goodness, we're not having much success. Here we go. Okay, so that is what it looks like. I guess it's sort of like an Avenger, which is a Humvee with 2 pods of 4 Stingers on top. I guess that's what the thinking is here for the Bullseye 4. So that's what the North Korean Bullseye 4 is. Andrew lists that here as artillery. I guess so. So that is, yeah. Well, you could list, no, because it's not air defense. So where the Avenger, the Humvee with the Stingers on top, is designed to take out aerial targets. The Bullseye 4 is designed to take out ground targets, so that's why it'd be seen as artillery there. Okay, tanks, got a T-62, T-80, a couple of other tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, half dozen of them, 7 of them, all destroyed there, 100% destruction rate, so that's pretty good. Range of BMPs, BTRs, BMDs, a couple of APCs, few trucks, few ATVs, some golf buggies there, and some destroyed and damaged civilian vehicles. Fairly similar lists there for both sides. And nothing too significant either way in those lists. Okay, right. Ukrainian prosecutors have opened 60,000 cases between January and October this year, according to the Financial Times, against soldiers for abandoning their positions, almost twice as many as they initiated in 2022 and 2023 combined. So I talked yesterday about there being a really significant number of deserters since the beginning of the war. Now, some of them have gone back to the army, and there is a sort of amnesty, as far as I'm aware, where they are saying that if you come back to the armed forces, then all will be forgiven, type thing. Here it says about 12 abscond on average every month from military training in Poland. Indeed, we'll have a little look at that. So, quote, this is Christopher Miller from the Financial Times. Men of military age are barred from leaving Ukraine, but some have taken the opportunity of being sent to overseas training camps in allied countries to desert while abroad. About 12 abscond on average each month from military training in Poland, said a Polish security official. Wow. Really challenging for the Ukrainians there. They are losing quite a few people to desertion, and that's understandable. It's tough, it's horrific, and that's always been the case with armed forces, I guess. Question is whether they are having a greater problem with desertion than the Russians. What are the comparative figures for either side? Now, moving on to equipment. Well, no, not equipment, actually. This is still in personnel, but it might pertain to a piece of equipment. Obituary of a Mi-28 pilot who was shot down on the 26th of October. I can't remember if we had that listed. In the area of the Kerch Bridge. While performing a combat mission, the helicopter was shot down over the Kerch Strait and lost its tail boom. Helicopter crashed. One would assume there that it was taken out by friendly fire, to be honest. Had that been shot down on a combat mission over the Kerch Bridge, really, yeah. I would have thought the crew lived, says Aidan. So Aidan Squatsons is a real pro-Russian. It's a Russian troll that's quite prominent on Twitter, very prominent in these information spaces. I love the fact that someone's gone back and checked what he said about at the time of this being reported. Evidently, it was reported, and I probably did report it myself. I just can't remember. Saying the crew lived, and then a couple of weeks later, obituary comes out the crew. So yeah, maybe not. Right, there's a polystyrene production facility on fire in Yekaterinburg. Pretty striking imagery coming out from there. According to preliminary reports, actually, a lot of people are talking about this now because it's still burning and it is a really sizable fire. Things not exactly perfect inside Russia either. Another big unexplained fire in Yekaterinburg. A polystyrene production facility burns and now the roof has collapsed. At least one injury. We've seen so many of these fires throughout the course of the year. Just add all the I've reported these time and time again. In Britain, our fire services generally these days do less putting out fires than they do sorting out other issues, car crashes and this and that and other safety concerns, because we just have fewer fires now than we used to. Because health and safety gone mad. Oh, health and safety doing what it's supposed to, stopping fires. Okay, fair enough. And that's a really good thing. But you look at the sheer the staggering frequency with which that fires take place in Russia. Sorry, words are difficult for me today. And there's definitely something funky going on in Russia. This happens far too frequently, and these fires are significant. That is a big fire. That is a factory entirely burning down, as far as I can see. Right, okay, going on to some losses in Syria. Now, I don't want to spend overly large amounts of time on Syria, but what's quite interesting here is how many of these pieces of kit are just really useful for Ukraine. there's part of me that says, oh, please, I know that you're fighting a war against the Assad regime and you want to use all of these bits of kit, but could you get some of them to Ukraine? This is all the stuff that Ukraine uses, of course, because it's Russian, Soviet era kit and later stuff as well. So rebel forces reportedly captured 5 operational aircraft during their takeover of the Kuwairis airbase. These could be the L-39ZA or ZO Albatross trainer aircraft. I don't know if you can use them in other ways other than training. As fighter craft as well. The news is yet to be visually confirmed. Well, we hear that another one of those jets and a Mi-8 helicopter were also captured. So another light fighter, the L-39 there, captured. So I presume they're not going to have just tons of those training jets. I'm sure they'll be used in some kind of fighting capacity, maybe not. And a Mi-8 helicopter. But then you just see things like this. Russian Pantsir S-1 air defense system stationed in Aleppo, been taken. And then there's so much video footage of all sorts of kit. Here's a Strela 10 short-range air defense system. I'm just thinking, man, just some of those. Can you send some of those stuff to Ukraine, please? After 3 days of successful offensive actions by the opposition in Syria, the Russian armed forces suffered significant losses. Some Russian units are surrounded. Hundreds of Russians are listed as missing in Syria, according to the GUR. So that is a Ukrainian intelligence service. Now, I don't know whether they're just delighting in this and doing a bit of psyops, or genuinely whether a lot of Russian troops have been caught off guard in these latest offensives, because they're happening in a number of different places as well. It's not just Aleppo. You got Aleppo, then you got Hama, and then you've got north of Aleppo as well. So a number of different places where, again, different rebel units are operating, different forces are operating. The Russians, in supporting the Assad regime, are in the country, both on the ground, in the air. They are fully supporting the Assad regime, but they could find themselves not just losing a bunch of kit, but also personnel, and all of that, I guess, helps Ukraine in the long run. I mean, something that might happen that could be unfortunate is if the Russians go, right, we're going to cut our losses and pull completely out of Syria, because Assad is on the end of an absolute tonking here. And if they pull all of their forces out of Syria, then suddenly they'd have a bunch of kit that they could throw into Ukraine. So it's almost like you want them to remain in Syria, fighting and getting attrited there as well. But certainly an area of the world to look out for over the next, few days, weeks, and whatnot. Moving on to distant strikes, Ukrainian Air Force has shot down 32 out of 78, so another big wave last night after a couple of days of not a lot going on. Last night, so yesterday it was, or the previous night was 10 that were sent in and 8 of them shot down, if I remember correctly. And then it's back up to, almost 80. 78 drones were sent in, 32 shot down, 45 taken out by electronic warfare, so that makes 77. And then the other one was in the Ukrainian airspace. Well, that has apparently been shot down now. So it's a full 78 of the 78 drones sent in were intercepted in some way. That's excellent figures, 100%. For the Ukrainians. Of course, what goes up must come down. I think there was some trouble, a little bit of issue in Kyiv with falling debris. Now, Russia launched this is according to Zelenskyy, 500 guided bombs, nearly 660 attack drones and 120 missiles of various types against Ukraine this week. And of course, it's all normalized. People don't report on it. It's forgotten about. But this happens every single night, every single week, every single month. He said, quote, "No country in the world has faced such daily attacks for so long." And that's absolutely right. Just imagine, I wonder what the stats were for the Blitz in London and how long that took place for. We have had attacks going on for 2.5 years now. 2.5 years. Honestly, I think, and this is why I get really upset when you get these absolute idiots just kind of supporting Russia and demanding Ukraine capitulate, and or saying, oh, that's nothing, look at Gaza, or wanting to play one off against the other, whatever approach it is, is invariably a way of minimizing what Russia is doing. And I think that's horrendous. And we need to remember what Russia is doing every single day to the Ukrainians, and it is horrific. Now, the Ukrainians hit back, but again, like we have seen over the last week, really, maybe a couple of weeks, that I'm slightly unsure as to how successful, and indeed not even how successful, but what Ukraine are doing. I have a feeling there are attacks that are taking place probably quite deep into Russia or in several places around Russia that we don't know about each night. And then we hear about these larger attacks and we hear rumors of something exploding here, something exploding there, but that's all. We don't hear much else. So, for example, night before, Berdyansk, and then this week we've seen places near Rostov-on-Don be targeted, reports of explosions in a number of different places, and then that's all we hear. We don't hear anything else, and you're left wondering, well, was there success? What did the Ukrainians do? Well, are the Russians being attrited? Are they being hit in the rear in ways that are pretty troubling for them, and we just don't realise? And it's just further a degradation of certain elements of the Russian war efforts. So here, another video just in from Starodub, says Tim White, in Bryansk, less than 40 kilometers from the border. These guys talk about the explosion on the video there. So there's an explosion in the background. It's a few, as you can see there, more drone problems in Russia, this time in Bryansk region. In the Starodubsky district, a strong fire started, a building's damaged. It seems that either a drone was knocked down there or possibly an air defense missile went wrong. So that looks in a residential area. Here's a building in Bryansk where the damage has occurred. I think the girl is crying, our home is behind this. So I don't know what took place in Bryansk. There we have it. This is Max24 reporting on that. We have claims of explosions in Saratov. Now, this is important because you've got the Engels 2 airbase there. So that's where some of those strategic bombers take off from to drop or send missiles into Ukraine. So any explosions near Saratov are always met with, what could have happened there? Is that a successful strike on the airbase there? But again, just don't know. Anyway, moving on, Mykhailivka has been living in darkness. So this is the city that is northwest of Kherson. You've got actually very close to Kherson, very close to the Dnipro River, you got the Mykhailivka Oblast that starts there. And that has been, the city's been living in darkness for 2 days already after a Russian strike on November the 28th damaged energy infrastructure. But even in conditions like this, people support each other. They charge their phones on energy banks, post offices and supermarkets that work on generators. The elderly experience the most difficulties. Russia fights against civilians, the elderly, the youngest, destroying Ukrainian infrastructure. So people just coming together and trying to survive and carry on their lives as normally as possible. Look at that. Let's talk about health and safety. I'm sure they've all been PAT tested, but my goodness, that's an overload waiting to happen surely. But anyway, that is good to see. People being able to cope in moments of literal darkness and challenge. Okay, moving on to other bits and pieces. I shouldn't say US, I should say other. We are going to start with the claim that Russia is preparing for a major offensive in the Zaporizhia region, according to Colonel Kilchenko, commander of the NGU's 3rd Spartan Brigade. And this might well be a continuation of the idea from that I heard recently, that actually the Kursk attack, the invasion into Russia by Ukrainian forces, actually upset the chronology of what was going to happen with the Russians. And the claim was that the Russians, I think one of the claims I've seen anyway, is that the Russians were going to attack into Zaporizhia, and that had to be put on hold because of Kursk. It could be that now they've got North Koreans helping out enough and they've sorted themselves out to the point where they can do that. And of course, they've been mounting pressure on in the area of Velika Novosilka and Karakova. Well, now we're looking at the sort of so this is Zaporizhia. This appears to be what was the reservoir there, and this looks like it's Robotina area there. Sorry, my words. I'm really struggling today, aren't I? Anyway, there could be a mounting offensive in the Zaporizhia area, and that's something to look out for, as the Russians might seek to capitalize on the successes they're having towards the east in the Karakova area, and increase their territorial control right along the Zaporizhia front. A few anecdotes to add in to finish off the video. A Russian paratrooper from the VDV, so they are the Paras, has been captured in Kursk. He signed a contract because he could not find a suitable job. Though he has more training than the usual Mobics, Ukrainians report that the quality of Russian troops went downhill as the shortage of soldiers increased. And be warned, because of course the same could be said for the Ukrainians, but I guess the question is, are you going to find Ukrainians fighting with only, say, 3 days training that we've seen previously? I don't think so. So I think the Ukrainians are probably doing, on balance, a better job of training their soldiers, and hopefully that has an effect on attrition rates of each side. Now, Russians, lots of videos sort of like this coming out. Recruited Russian prisoners from the Storm Z unit looted the bodies of other recruited Russian prisoners from the PMC Wagner. Russian prisoners recruited into the army are beaten for looting the bodies of their dead comrades, even though it's a common practice in the Russian army. And actually there's just video evidence of the beatings they're taking, and they are in these videos they get oops, I didn't mean to show that. I meant to pause that. So they're kind of whipping the arms with a kind of a whip or a belt type thing, and you see his arms afterwards, and yeah, he's not in a good way. That's in there. These sort of events seem to take place really commonly with the Russians, and there is definitely an awful lot of corporal punishment that takes place. Now, Chris Owicki, a couple of threads from him. Incompetence by Russian commanders is reported to have led to the deaths of Russian Special Forces operators, likely including drone pilots in areas of northwest Syria that have been overrun by rebels. According to a source quoted by the Telegram channel that Chris Owicki used a lot, the events in Syria have once again demonstrated the failure of the leadership of the Special Operations Forces of the Russian Armed Forces. Despite having advanced information about the plans of militant groups in the Aleppo region, the Special Forces Command did not take any adequate actions to preserve personnel, thereby allowing the death of specialists who were simply caught off guard by the militants. At the moment, no actions are being taken to evacuate the dead and wounded or to search for the missing. The dead and missing servicemen are subordinates of one of the favourites of the SOF commander, Flyutstikov, Vadim Baikulov, call sign Biker, who is currently cooling his heels in Moscow and was awarded the title of Hero of Russia for heroism, courage and bravery, demonstrated primarily by his subordinates back in 2016 during the operation in Syria. So, point is that special forces appear to be on the receiving end of some attrition in in Syria, which again does help the Ukrainians, I think, in the long run. More evidence of Russian losses from Syria today. An FPV drone squad was overrun and killed. Either the Russians have to replace this grouping here in Syria and where they're going to take them from, and that draws on finite resources. So either they're taking them from Ukraine to put them in Syria, or they're taking them from training in Russia and not putting them into Ukraine but having to put them in Syria, or they end up giving up on Syria and losing influence in a country that itself will help them to some degree, because all these things are connected, and that's why I report on them so much. So as I was saying in my live stream last night, if the Russians lose Syria, they lose not only Tartus, the warm water port in the Mediterranean, but they also lose the ability to send AN-12 cargo planes to Africa due to Syria being the stop-off point for those planes. Now, if they lose Syria, it means that they might start finding the work they do in Africa more difficult, more challenging. And if that's the case, then they lose influence there and they can lose money there. And that money that they're getting from Africa is being used to pay for the war in Ukraine. Broadly speaking, any such attrition is going to help the Ukrainians. Right, moving on. Another Chris Wiki thread. The commander of the Russian 13th Guards tank regiment is reported to have been arrested, along with several of his subordinates, for extorting tens of millions of rubles, tooth veneers, and other material goods from soldiers under his command in the Luhansk People's Republic. The regiment has had a checkered history during a war in Ukraine. Only a month into the war in March 2022, its then commander reportedly shot himself after it was discovered that many of his tanks had been looted for parts and were unusable. Since then, the regiment has gained a reputation for treating its men brutally. Soldiers from the regiment were filmed being stripped naked, beaten and made to trim grass with their fingers in August 2023. The regiment's commander succeeded in making gains through repeated meat assaults that cost many lives but earned them credit with the Russian Ministry of Defense. According to the Telegram channel that Chris Wiki uses, they used this reputation as impunity to commit criminal acts. With the support of the commander, Colonel Fail Shagiakhmetov, call sign Shah, a whole group of commanders was formed in the regiment who were engaged in extortion. The second person in this chain was a hero of the VCHK OGPU Telegram publications, a former FSB border service officer convicted and released, who became the commander of the assault company, Andrei Levin. And this is a guy I reported yesterday, so we're just getting a bit more details of this incident of this guy being found with loads of money in his account. Anyway, to continue, under his command were 4 more platoon commanders who were put in charge of doing all the dirty work. Soldiers had to pay for everything, giving an average of 50% of injury payments and compensation worth about 1.5 million rubles or $14,000 each time. Otherwise, those who disagreed were sent to the torture prison in Zaitseve. Complaints about the arbitrariness of the commands were regularly received by the prosecutor's office and counterintelligence, but the heroes of the SMO were arrested only the second time. The first to be caught was a platoon commander named Zhukov, call sign Shaman. The former convict was captured in the summer. 40 million rubles, 337,000 odd spondulis. Where has it gone? Yeah, $373,639 were found on his bank card, and he had veneers in his mouth worth about 2 million rubles. That's $18,681 at LNR prices in the penal colony where he served his sentence. Such services were not provided. The rest of the gang were then detained, but despite the millions in turnover and a rather immodest life for the front line, many were released as witnesses. According to the source of the Telegram channel, Andrei Levin and Fail Shagiakhmetov were detained on the second attempt after the platoon commanders gave testimony. The former border guard was sent to a pre-trial detention centre, but the commander has been released for now. The colonel was interrogated as a witness and continues to command the regiment. So, although this terrible corruption has been found out, they still seem to be sort of getting away with doing it. And I guess the problem for the army is that if you were to do everyone over who was committing corruption, then you would strip the army of most of its kind of mid-level command to the point that the army would just cease to be functional. So they've got this problem where, like, well, if we do something about the corruption, we're already struggling to get people full stop. If we do something about the corruption, we're going to completely hamstring the armed forces. Is just a bit of a dilemma to be in. My goodness. Right, Russia has set a record defense budget for 2025 of $145 billion allocated to national defense, making up 32.5% of the country's total budget, according to Associated Press. That is a huge amount of money, obviously, to be spending on the national defense. I know that the US spends 900 odd billion, but then they've been doing that for years and their whole economy is built around that, and their GDP is significantly larger than Russia's. Putin approves Russia's budget with a record spending on national defense. Spending on a war and law enforcement agencies exceeds expenditures on education, healthcare, social policy, and the national economy combined. Wow. Okay, when I did my live stream last night, I messed up where I was going with that. So if you remember, I was talking about Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan had been denigrating Zelenskyy and, by extension, Ukraine. And then people like Vladimir Klitschko, Dmytro Kuleba, former foreign minister, and Jake Bro, and others, and Gary Kasparov said, "Okay, I'll come on to Joe Rogan and talk about these issues and set you straight." And then it turned out that Zelenskyy had said himself, he'd reached out to Joe Rogan's team and said he'd come on, and Joe Rogan said no. So obviously Joe Rogan's not interested in finding out the truth about the things about which he comments, and he's happy to just say pretty disreputable things without any justification. Okay, where I was supposed to go next, but I messed up my tabs, is that a chap called Lex Fridman, who has interviewed Trump, who's kind of in that same information space, has a podcast. So who is Lex Fridman? Let's go to Wikipedia. He's a Russian-American computer scientist and podcaster. Since 2018, he's hosted the Lex Fridman podcast, where he interviews notable figures from various fields such as science, technology, sports, and politics. He rose to prominence in 2019 after Elon Musk praised his study, which concluded that drivers remained focused while using Tesla's semi-autonomous driving system. So there you go, and you can go and find out about him and MIT and blah blah blah. But he interviewed Trump. He's also been, associated with Joe Rogan, Ivanka Trump, Jared Kushner, so on and so forth. Okay, so he's been quite clever here. Well, that's unexpected, says Tim White. Rogan wimped out at that, as in interviewing any of these other people, but particularly Zelenskyy himself. Lex leapt in and Z bites. If you don't know Fridman, he's had Trump, Musk, Netanyahu on his podcast previously. Not many sympathetic to Dems or Ukraine. So this is the lion's den as much as Joe Rogan is, although it's not as big as Joe Rogan. But he has been associated with Joe Rogan, I think has defended Joe Rogan. This is Lex Fridman. And anyway, Lex Fridman said, "I would love to do a 3-hour podcast with Zelenskyy. I will come to Kyiv for it. Let's do it." To which Zelenskyy replied, "Agreed. See you in Ukraine." Wow. So here we have, although it's the lion's den comes to Ukraine, you have someone in this information space going to interview Zelenskyy. Now, the only problem I ever had with Zelenskyy being interviewed is that actually his English isn't quite as good as other people who could do that. That's the only thing. So I don't know whether they would have translators or not. But I think that's brilliant. And there's been these different theories about, what should happen going forward with the information spaces. For example, if you talk about the Democrats against the Republicans in future American elections, the Republicans basically control all the information spaces, really. When you look at it like talk radio, podcasts, and political adjacent podcasts, local news through the Sinclair Broadcast Group, and then national news, particularly through, say, Fox News, and so on and so forth. So they either control it outright or they've got the vast majority, etc., etc. Okay. So there have been these questions about, okay, the Democrats need to have their own Joe Rogan, is one of the theories, or their own this, or their own that. So there needs to be a parallel to that information space, a kind of left-wing information space. Others say, no, it's not that you need a parallel. It's that the Democrats, for example, need to just go on these shows and use Joe Rogan. Because what the right wing do so very well is they lift up their own and they support their own, and they plug and finance these big information space entities in a way that the Democrats and the left don't really do in America. The reason we're saying this is that you've got an example of that theory happening here, which is, rather than Zelenskyy go, "No, I'm not going to go on Joe Rogan or Lex Fridman, I'm going to go on our own version of that, which would be very sympathetic to me." No, I need to go onto that, and then it normalizes people from the other side coming on these podcasts, and then you have an opportunity to convince, if you're good at what you do, you have an opportunity to convince Lex Fridman, but particularly Lex Fridman's audience, or Joe Rogan's audience, rather than just leave that to the other side to just have as their own. You need to challenge that narrative by being on there. You need to be everywhere. So I would say it's both and. It's create your own analogues, as you know, create your own left-wing Joe Rogan or whatever, or centrist Joe Rogan or whatever, and then also appear on Joe Rogan, or in this case Lex Fridman. I think Zelenskyy doing that is a very clever move. Anyway, let me know what you think, and that's enough from me today. So thanks very much, take care, and I'll speak to you soon.